Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and welcome to the show. My guest this week is Christopher Warre Smets, a writer-director whose credits include The Overlookers and The Last Hitman, but if you're an Orphan Black fan, you're sure to have seen his behind-the-scenes interviews and featurettes online or lurking in the supplements of the Blu-rays and DVDs of the series. His new short film, This Is Not What You Had Planned, starring Christian Brune, friend of the show, Elizabeth Whitmere, Jefferson Brown, and Natalie Lisinska, was recently made available online as part of the National Screen Institute's NSI Online Short Film Fest. Chris picked Out of Sight, Steven Soderbergh's 1998... actually, I don't know what to call it. Is it a romance? Is it a thriller? A comedy? A crime drama? Much like the Elmore Leonard novel from which it was adapted, it's all of those things at once. A charming, time-jumbled riff on heist pictures grounded in the romance between George Clooney's ex-con Jack Foley and Jennifer Lopez's U.S. Marshal Karen Sisko. It's a throwback to the character thrillers of the 70s and the first indication of the sophisticated studio pictures that Soderbergh would perfect over the next decade. It's funky, it's funny, it's sweet, it's scary. Whatever sort of film you think it is, it's so much more. This is Someone Else's Movie.
You know, Out of Sight is a film that, well, I'll tell you this. I feel in a way like I kind of reverse engineered in a way because I know where we're going to get to by the end of the podcast. Right. And I thought about films that I have stolen a lot from over the years or you know, films that have influenced me. And there were, you know, a few I kind of kicked around, and one was broadcast news. And I thought about The Limey, and I was sort of rewatching stuff. And there was something about Out of Sight that just jumped out at me, and I hadn't seen it for a while, and I had that kind of I was a little nervous actually to commit to it, to commit to Out of Sight. I thought, you know, have I outgrown this movie? Will I have anything to say about it? And there was something about the marriage of the mainstream, because obviously Soderbergh is doing, you know, like a big budget crime film with major stars, and it's based on an Elmore Leonard novel, and it's coming out a couple of years
6 months after Jackie Brown.
Jackie Brown is coming out a couple of years after Get Shorty. Mm-hmm. Same producers. Yep. At one point, Sonnenfeld was going to direct it, and I was a big Elmore Leonard fan, and I'd read Out of Sight, and I was really excited to see what Soderbergh was going to do with the book. I remember that there was something about right away there was an energy that it had as soon as the movie started. Like it's that first shot of the camera like panning around, finding Clooney coming out of the bank, but it's like it's out of focus, and it's zooming in and out, and it's trying to find him, and you know, right away. And this was like the late 90s, and I feel like there wasn't a lot of films that did that. Mm-hmm. There weren't a lot of films that kind of embraced that 70s aesthetic. Like I think now there are for sure. I feel like that film definitely went on to influence a lot of other films, a lot of TV shows. But there was just something about the way that he was able to marry all these elements together. You know, make it a crime film, make it a romantic film. Give it a real sense of, you know, of style, and it just has all these things that I love in a movie, like great dialogue, memorable characters, both lead characters and supporting roles, like people who come from like one scene, you know, who just you feel like you could watch an entire film about them. Yeah. You know. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's always sort of stuck. It's always kind of stuck in my mind. It's a movie that definitely I end up thinking about a lot. So, yeah, and also I think it's a movie that people don't necessarily think about as much anymore. I don't know if it's a movie that is really in the conversation as much anymore.
Yeah, it occupies a weird cinematic space. The more I think about it, the the it's from a different era. It's from a window in time, this tiny window in time when George Clooney was considered box office poison. Jennifer Lopez was a huge star, or about to be. Like, you can feel that she had the energy there. She was coming up. He was sort of on his way sideways after Batman and Robin, and that self-effacing way he took the blame for all of it.
Yep.
Soderbergh had basically spent the last 3 years renouncing his previous work.
He was in movie jail.
He self-imposed movie jail too. Which, like, he was disowning the first 4 movies he made.
Right.
I interviewed him in '96. I guess it would have been the first time I talked to him for at TIFF. He brought 2 films. He had Grey's Anatomy and Schizopolis.
Yeah.
And he spent almost half of the interview time telling me how much he hated The Underneath and how I shouldn't say it was good because I liked it.
Oh, I like it too, and
it's actually sort of a test run for Out of Sight in a lot of ways.
Absolutely, and I mean it's the same DP, it's Elliot Davis, and
same structural trick.
Absolutely, well, that was the use of color from The Underneath, and I remember loving The Underneath. I saw it on VHS probably, and I'm sure it was like a pan and scan. Oof. It would have been right, 'cause it's so beautifully shot in widescreen, and seeing Out of Sight, I thought immediately, I was like, oh, I was seeing these tropes he'd used in The Underneath, and he was bringing them back in again. Because I mean, The Underneath is interesting because it's also a crime film.
Yeah, it's a remake of
Criss Cross.
Criss Cross, yeah.
But I remember thinking that it had that. It was a really interesting example of. And I'm sure he would hate this because I don't think he's a guy who's into the auteur theory at all. Even though, I mean, his films are always so signature. There's you can tell a Soderbergh film in like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
But it was like, okay, you're making a noir film, but there's this weird quirky dialogue. There's like this whole, remember there's this whole sequence where Peter Gallagher and his brother are like arguing about money, and finally he says, "What is this, like a Eugene O'Neill play?" Like, it's very, it was quirky and interesting, and I always found that fascinating that, he would renounce it the way he did with you.
Totally turned his back on it, and by extension, he said, like, what he was saying at the time was that the first 4 movies he made, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, Kafka, King of the Hill, which is just beautiful, and The Underneath, he said, in some way they're all compromised and they're not what he wanted, and he doesn't feel like he got it right, and so he had to put himself into the wilderness and make 2 films completely outside the studio system and outside his own wheelhouse, which were Grey's Anatomy and Schizopolis, and just embrace whatever weirdness he had to embrace in order to teach himself how to make movies again. I'm paraphrasing because this is 20 years ago, but that's more or less what he said. And it's such a weird assertion to say, oh, my first 4 movies, which, okay, Kafka's problematic, but the other 3, nobody had any trouble with them.
No. Palme d'Or.
Yeah, and Sundance and everything.
Yeah, of course.
And King of the Hill, nobody saw it because Gramercy boned it on release-wise, but it's such a lovely, perfect little film. It's evocative and small, and, it took like 20 years at least to get the remaster done properly. It wasn't even available on screen on DVD. Every time we spoke subsequently, and I've interviewed him a number of times over the years, every time we talked, I was like, okay, when's King of the Hill letterboxed? Come on, I have the Laserdisc, but DVD is the thing now. Let's do that.
Yeah.
And he kept saying, there's going to be a box set. They're telling Universal's talking about it. And it never happened. Yeah. And I think on some level, it's because it would have involved King of the Hill and The Underneath, and he just didn't want to, look at them anymore. So Criterion finally got him.
Right.
But
and Kafka's still MIA.
Yeah, I have the Japanese DVD.
Oh, really? I have the Kafka laser.
Right.
And also the King of the Hill Laserdisc. Mm-hmm. But it's like he ditched formalism.
Yeah, and instead he picked up this. I've been trying to figure out what to call it, because Tarantino's movies they feature self-aware characters, but the movies themselves, I don't know that they are self-aware. Maybe nowadays they are.
The Tarantino ones.
Yeah. The ones that the sort of that Out of Sight almost catches up with, but doesn't, because Out of Sight and Jackie Brown exist in the same universe as we get to.
Absolutely, yeah.
But what you get from Soderbergh around that time, especially starting with The Underneath, but then rolling forwards, are movies where the films themselves are playing with the audience, and they require the audience to invest. Even if it's just figure out what color I'm using and what that means in Out of Sight, because there's not a lot. It's not a daring film exactly, and now it's just a Soderbergh movie because we know what they look like.
Yeah.
But at the time, I mean, I saw it with a preview audience like a week before it opened, and 500 or 600 people at the York one, and nobody knew what to make of it except that they were having a great time.
Right.
And you could feel the audience struggling with it in a way that...
Really?
Yeah, a little bit. Just the first... Just because of the time sequencing and the jumping. Because I guess they hadn't seen the Underneath. But I got it right away, and I'm like, oh, I get... Okay, cool, let's see where this goes. And then, of course, it turns into this incredibly charming romance that has all this other stuff hung on it.
Yeah.
But it took a while, I think, for the general public who were cringing at the idea of a George Clooney movie to see that this was a really kind of mature, soft-hearted, intelligent love story that is also all these other things. But it takes a while for that to present itself.
And it is a weird mix, too, because then you have these moments of violence that are very visceral and very sudden. And also funny, but not funny in a Tarantino way, exactly.
Yeah.
They're almost offhanded. I mean, obviously, the one you can point to the most is the White Boy Bob scene on the stairs, which I've been laughing at, I think, for almost 20 years now. But that's interesting because that it was they were having not trouble, but struggling with it, because I think about this is post Pulp Fiction, and I remember seeing that movie opening day, and that sense from the audience that you would hear that collective gasp, like, oh, okay, right, which of course spawned a lot of movies that were sort of the Tarantino knockoffs, that were sort of like a lot of pop culture references and chatty gangsters. And I feel like it might have been Roger Ebert or someone who talked about Out of Sight and said this was kind of the first post Pulp Fiction movie that took the ideas, like the good ideas from Pulp Fiction, without actually ripping off the structure or ripping off the things in a bad way.
Yeah. I think Pulp Fiction, too, it's easier to follow it because the sequences are self-contained. I mean, it jumbles up the chronology, but you never mix them. We see what happens to Vincent Vega, and then he's back, and you can figure it out pretty quickly. Because you're also, that, all right, this is a robbery thing, links from the beginning to the end. With Out of Sight, it's scrambled in a way that if you hadn't seen The Underneath, or, Hiroshima Mon Amour, or any of the half dozen key art films that Soderbergh carries around in his brain all the time, you might have trouble figuring it out. And I'm sure that my being familiar with that other stuff is also helpful.
Right.
But I'd seen The Underneath and instantly got, color coding, gotcha.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the fact that you have, Lompoc is yellow and the Glades
Detroit
is blue. Oh, can we talk about Detroit? Like, I want to just, every time I see that movie, I think about this is the most amazing snow globe version of Detroit. It's like this... It's like this sort of like fantasy Parisian version of Detroit. Like it's so magical. Yeah. Like when she's when they're in the hotel together. I mean, it's just you feel like there's something so warm and romantic and Christmassy about Detroit.
And then people start dying.
Because
the blood looks so much better against the snow.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is like creating these individual climates for his pieces of the film, and he did it again in Traffic, and I'm sure he does it in Che, and it's something he's never really stopped doing, this sort of complete atmospheric immersion. Whether or not he's doing it chronologically, it doesn't even matter. Like the Magic Mike films are just these amazing visions of Florida, and then in the sequel, all the different places he goes.
Florida, and this is just this pastel kind of wonderland.
Yeah, where everything is possible.
Yeah.
If you don't screw it up within 2 seconds.
Right. Yeah, it's a postcard.
Yeah. And so the visual sensibility is an amazing guide to the film storyline. But then there's the emotional storyline, which is instantly recontextualizes Clooney after 5 years of him being this high wattage superstar. The movie choices were questionable, but ER just made him this huge romantic lead. And then Soderbergh says, what if he was old and stupid? Instantly matures him. What if he made the wrong choices?
And shaved his hairline back.
Yeah, just the tiniest little things, but these cues that say, you're not going to quite get the thing that you want from this movie. You're going to get something that's richer and more interesting, but you have to be willing. And I think that's the proposition he puts forward in almost all of his films. You have to come with me and I will show you wonders. And in this case, it's going to be George Clooney as this sort of doofus bank robber who, it's not Coen Brothers stupidity, but it paves the road for that character. He's short fused. He's calm, calculating, and prone to making the wrong decision, which is such a fantastic contradiction.
But in a believable way.
Yeah, that's completely organic.
Because I've watched the film 3 times in the last week, and preparation for this was watch it before I left, and the thing that always strikes me is just how believably dumb the criminals are.
Yeah.
I mean, for him, for sure. I mean, the idea of like going out and flooding the car after he robs the bank in the first scene, and there's the great sequence where they've broken into Albert Brooks's house at the end, and and they're stealing steaks, and Don Cheadle is picking out suits, and I mean, there's such a they kind of lowball themselves.
Yeah, that's Leonard, right? Like,
absolutely,
the classic Elmore Leonard thing is like, if they weren't stupid, they wouldn't be criminals.
Yeah,
they'd find a way. Like, then the contrast with Albert Brooks's character, and even here, is sort of pulled forward. It's like, this guy's an operator. He got caught, but he's not really suffering in prison. He's doing fine, and he'll come out, and his life will be his again, except that everything goes to hell. The idea that a white collar criminal would. Of course he would think he has one up on all of these guys in their scene. And I realize now, as I'm saying this, we're jumping back and forth in the movie the same way the movie
we completely are. You can recut this.
Yeah, or I'll just leave this part out where we talk about it and we'll seem like geniuses.
Yeah.
But it functions with so many moving parts that I think that's where the chronology gets to me, where I'm just amazed at his confidence in thinking that he can pull this off. With all of these different story aspects, all of these different characters, everybody wants different things.
And different tones.
Yeah.
That's what is amazing to me, is that there's so much that he's trying to pull off again. Like, it is a crime film, and it takes that aspect very seriously. There is this very sweet, adult love story in the middle of it. There's real, knock around kind of comedy, and it's funny, when I was watching it last week, something occurred to me, a comparison occurred to me that had never crossed my mind before, and it's that it almost feels like the romantic comedy version of Heat.
Okay.
Right? Because you've got this idea about these two characters who are kind of like, they have a relationship, but they're always sort of like,
they work in the same industry, but they're at opposite poles.
They're at opposite ends, and like De Niro and Pacino have the diner scene in Heat. And then, of course, they both kind of know how it's going to end. It's going to end with, one of them, Pacino taking out De Niro. This is the same thing, where it's like they come together because there's an attraction there, and they like each other and they respect each other. But ultimately, I mean, there's that great moment they have after they slept together in the hotel room, and she says, "What's going to happen?" He just says, "You'll know."
Yeah.
And it's great. There's such a simplicity to it, and such a that's actually something that struck me this time through that I'd never really got me before. But this idea that, and maybe it's because I'm older now, and I saw it when I would have been about probably 25, 26 when I watched it, and being older now, and Clooney stepping out at the end of the movie up to the top of the stairs and pulling the mask over his face, and just I'm not going to go back. I'm too old for this.
Yeah. And
if anyone's going to shoot him, he'd rather it be her. If he's going to go out anyway, it's the woman that he had this amazing connection with. Yeah. And there was something so kind of beautiful and sad and romantic about that. And it's and again, such an unlikely, shift at the end emotionally, but it works.
And in any other movie, it would be a ridiculous cliche.
Absolutely.
Like, it would just be a groaner.
Yeah.
But by the time we get there, we understand how he thinks and why he would say that and why he would think it's this huge romantic gesture. The only way to make me stop is for you to kill me. Because he's making the wrong decision. But it's not the wrong... Like, we finally get into his head. And then the little flourish of how they save that, how she saves him, essentially, is just perfectly in character for her as well. It's like they save each other by being themselves.
Yes.
And it's the thing that Heat can't do, because there's no... Like, Heat is about respect, and Out of Sight is about love. Mm-hmm. So Out of Sight ends the only way that it can, which is this magnificent little... Oh, and by the way, we're going to do this forever.
Yeah. It's great.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah. And it also means a lot that when we get to that moment at the top of the stairs, she knows why he's doing it. She knows about his uncle he used to work with.
Yeah.
You know, the uncle that was in jail most of his life and then, you know, died in the hospital. Like, she knows where he's coming from. And she understands this guy. And there's something, there's such a beauty to it, you know, and that really, and again, that comes from this, part of it is just this perfect balance of tones that he finds. And I think, you know, and you nailed it too when you talk about the idea that in any other film, this ending would be over the top or ridiculous. Yeah. Because Soderbergh always finds, like, the perfect level with the acting. And I'm not sure, I don't even know if it's something that is found in the editing room. I think it's something that they just do, they're able to find on set. You know, I remember when I made my first movie and I gave it to my lawyer at the time, and he watched it and he called me and said, you know, everyone's acting in the same movie. He said that's a really hard thing to do, which is a great compliment. And I always feel like that with Soderbergh films. Like, everybody is always in the same film. There's nobody who's coming in with some kind of, like, you know, what the hell. I mean, Jennifer Lopez is a great example. Yeah. Because I think the things I'd seen her in this beforehand were things like, you know, Anaconda.
Yeah, Blood and Wine had just
Blood and Wine, yeah. Well, I'd seen her in that.
And they packaged her as this huge new sex star.
Yeah.
Because she has a scene where she sleeps with Jack Nicholson, which is, you know, it's an awkward scene now even, but at the time it's just like, yeah, she's sensual. There's something that she's being eroticized by the movie. There's something really interesting about the way she holds back and all of that. And then she shows up in this and it's like a different person.
She made no impact on me whatsoever in the things I'd seen before. And actually, when I heard that she was going to be in this, having read the book, I was disappointed. You know, in the book.
Karen Sisko doesn't seem like she would be.
Not at all.
Jennifer Lopez.
I mean, she's described a different way. Obviously, in the book, like, she's described as being blonde, and they were originally talking about, like, Nicole Kidman, who's got that kind of, at the time, had that kind of pretty toughness. You could see her pulling it off.
And I would hope that the studio said you can't have two Batman actors.
Oof.
No, different movie, but it doesn't matter.
It's two actors from The Peacemaker.
Oh, that's true.
Right?
Jesus, I forgot about The Peacemaker.
You can't re-see. Yeah, it's like the magic from The Peacemaker.
Yeah, I thought about The Peacemaker not 5 minutes ago when we were talking about Clooney's films.
Oh,
that's
God.
the one, the poster popped into my head, and then I completely forgot it again. Like it had never happened.
Well, that's I'm
you
sure
wouldn't
that's
want them together.
No, exactly. But The Peace, which I never saw.
It's not good.
I can imagine.
He actually has one moment towards the end, and it's the only thing that I enjoyed about The Peacemaker. Mm-hmm. There's a moment at the very end where they're racing to deactivate this suitcase nuclear weapon, which is the size of a torpedo, and they only have like a minute or two and it's in a church, I think, somewhere, some building. They've tried to blow up the United Nations. They've disarmed the terror. They've killed the terrorists, but they still have the bomb to deal with. And Kidman is the scientist, and she's working to disassemble it, and Clooney is this polo shirt wearing special agent.
Right.
So she's rushing and she says, like, get out, like, leave me to this, get outside, I've got, like, I have this. And he just looks at her and delivers some kind of, the face is, where am I going to run to? There's no point. But he laughs, and it's, that moment lines up with Out of Sight beautifully. Like that, it's fatalistic, but it's funny, and oh God, that would not have worked with them together at all.
No.
Out of Sight. No.
You
can't, because he's so much more interesting than she is on film. And I don't know when that happened, because when I first saw her in Dead Calm and even in Days of Thunder, she was magnetic.
The magnetic is exactly the word for it. Yeah. No, it's funny because I think there may be. It took one scene for me to be convinced that Jennifer Lopez was the perfect Karen Sisko, and it's amazing. Like, you know, I don't think I like her in anything else.
Yeah. Is it the tussle scene?
Oh no! I mean, it's the very first scene with her dad.
Okay.
Where she gets the gun. With Dennis Farina. Yeah. And it's such a fantastic scene, and they play it so well, and you know, and she's just got this, you know, I was thinking about it, and there's that toughness that she has that a lot of the time I feel like they try to sand that element off, because obviously she's very, I would imagine, like a really, you know, ambitious, driven person in real life.
I would assume. I mean,
right?
You don't have that career without wanting it.
But she never really plays characters like that. She's always kind of, they kind of soften her, and she's kind of, you know, I don't know, a little watery, and this, she's just got that steel core. You know, you buy her as a law enforcement officer, you know?
Yeah.
And
now, what is it, like 16 years later, she's playing one again, or Badge of Lies or something. Mm-hmm. And she's like that's where she should be, because you want her to be steely. You want her to have that backbone. And it's weird that she should have had that in Anaconda, but didn't.
Oh God,
because she was just packaged as the girl in the tank top.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
and that's like that's a great example of a movie where like John Voight is in a different film entirely.
Yeah.
But
Eric Stoltz is sort of kind of there, but kind of sort of not.
You get to kind of literally like sleep through the entire film.
Yeah. I think it was. I mean, I don't think it was, because I've been saying this for almost a year now, and I finally found the quote. It was Edgar Wright who said it about Scott Pilgrim. It's like everyone making that movie is pulling the same rope at the same level of tension. That's how you do it. You just tell everyone exactly what you want, and then you just let them do it.
And it also feels a little bit like there's this perfect kind of conflagration of all these talents at the same time in the movie, where you're kind of amazed that you have obviously Clooney and Lopez, but just Don Cheadle and Louis Guzman and Viola Davis and Isaiah Washington and Steve Zahn, like Ving Rhames. I mean, every single person who steps on screen is kind of on the way up. They are perfectly suited to that role, but they also bring something. I find that Ving Rhames is a great example. Like, he's somebody in this film. There's a sweetness that he has and like a warmth that he has. I've never really seen him exhibit anywhere else. Like, he's just so, he's so. I don't want to say affable, but there's something so funny about him. Like, I think there's that scene at the end where Clooney and Albert Brooks are in his study, and they're still kind of like going over old business, and Ving Rhames is kind of like throwing his arms up in the air, like, oh my God, these guys, like, come on, like, we got to get out of here, like, what are you doing? And the fact that he calls his sister, he's this very religious guy, and that's right. And that smile that he has at the end when he drives off with the diamonds is just, I mean, it's interesting. He has a real, I mean, again, like Tarantino, there's this gift for finding the best in the actors, but it's a very different energy that Soderbergh mines from them, I find.
Yeah.
There's such a humanity to it. Well,
even to the point of casting Keaton in one scene.
Oh God.
Which is the
yes.
the Tarantino verse colliding with the Soderbergh verse, which it should be matter and antimatter.
Yeah.
And Keaton is playing a slightly different version of Ray Nicolette, which is so fascinating.
Yeah.
In Jackie Brown, Ray Nicolette is an abusive operator. Mm-hmm. He's a heartless kind of. He's not corrupt, but he's not corrupt either. Yeah. He's just sort of a jerk fed. Mm-hmm. And in this, he's a boyfriend. Like, he's recontextualized as this sort of dipshit boyfriend who has one tiny scene, and you just get to appreciate the fact that he pulled this off. That not only did Keaton pull this off, but Soderbergh managed to, because Jersey Films had produced both movies, but he got him for a movie from a different director, a different studio. And I think it's like the first wink at this expanded cinematic universe, which we all just take for granted now.
Of Elmore Leonard?
Yeah.
And
the Leonardverse.
The Leonardverse. And there's something funny about the fact that he is different. There's something he's very reactive in that scene. Mm-hmm. He's kind of sitting,
he's great.
Right? Like he like Farina kind of drives that scene with him. And there's something so great about exactly, like seeing that character who was really,
it's like almost a villain.
Manipulating. Yeah. Like he manipulates in Jackie Brown, and in this he really is this, he's such an interesting. I actually remember, I'd heard that he was in the movie.
Okay.
And I didn't know that he was playing Ray Nicolette, and somebody I know had seen the film and said, he's playing a character kind of like his character in Jackie Brown, and then I'm watching going, no, wait, he's actually playing. He's actually playing Ray Nicolette. This is, and it was so. I was just sat there, kind of amazed, and I'd forgotten that in the book, Ray Nicolette has a very small part in it. But yeah, it's a cool, and it's cool, and that does speak to that tonal disparity between Tarantino and Soderbergh, where he just there's again that sense of playfulness and sort of bemused humanity to it, which is so interesting.
Yeah. It's something that has come up. Like, I've discussed it with him once or twice.
With Keaton?
No, I've never had the opportunity. No, with Soderbergh.
Okay.
We've talked about how he's never made a horror movie. He's never made, like, he's come close.
Right.
That's how
Really?
we got in. Well, Solaris is sort of an emotional horror film. And we got into that way. We were talking about the tones and how there's a scene in Che which is horrific, but it's not, it never tips into that genre, and I think that's when we were talking about it. And he said that he doesn't think he's interested in those extremes of cinema, but not because they don't offer the opportunity stylistically. I think he thinks there's no emotional component to horror. Once you introduce that, you're scaring the audience, you're not scaring the characters. It's a different relationship to the narrative, to the texture of the film. And he said that it's the same reason he doesn't want to make a superhero movie. He feels he's done that. The Ocean's movies, he said, are his superhero films. But he's not interested in going into giant genre stuff. Like even Solaris, which is close to horror and technically science fiction, really isn't. Like, it's just about people in rooms dealing with stuff. And dealing with their own emotions and confronting stuff. It's got, there's space travel, but you never really see it. It's not important. It's not about spectacle. It's about inner turmoil. And I think that's why Out of Sight works so well, because he's so suited to Leonard, who would just, entire chapters are just dialogue.
Just dialogue.
It's not about plot.
He loves to listen to people talk.
Yeah.
And again, it's a very, it's not ostentatious. It's very observational. I was watching The Girlfriend Experience on the weekend. I'd never watched that before, and I mean, the entire movie is just a series of business transactions. Yeah, it's just conversations between people, and it's these very kind of, subtle power struggles that go on, and there's also that scene in The Limey where, like, which Lem Dobbs complains about on the commentary track, but these thugs who are talking about a sliding scale, what they're getting paid. And they get into a debate about it on the commentary track, and Soderbergh's like, look, like, people don't talk about money in movies. Like, these are the kind of things that you don't, the conversations that I'm not hearing. I want to hear them. Yeah,
and then he made Magic Mike, which is a film about what people are willing to do to get paid. That's its mission statement. And the Girlfriend Experience comes directly from that, and it's so fascinating to watch him apply his interests to existing things.
Oh yeah,
genres, books, television series now, but he is such a fascinating filmmaker, and
he's an eavesdropper.
Yeah, and Out of Sight gives you the sense that you've wandered into somebody's movie that maybe you weren't supposed to see. Like, it feels like an assembly cut or a rough cut in so many different ways. Like, ideas are bouncing around inside of it.
Well, it was interesting because this was one of the first DVDs that I ever had, and I listened to
probably one of the first DVDs Universal released.
Yeah,
one of the first real special editions.
Yeah, and I still have it. I almost sold it a couple of years ago. And I just like, you know what? I got to hang on to this. Like, this just means too much to me.
Yeah.
And I mean, that commentary track I played over and over again, and it was funny to listen to it again in the last week and hear all the scenes that the producers and the studio wanted them to cut. Like that. Yeah. We mentioned it before. The sort of the afterglow scene. Not even really an afterglow scene, but it's their post sex scene in the hotel room.
And it's the key to the movie.
It's the key to the film.
That whole sequence.
And they wanted them to cut it like right down to the editing room. They he says that Ann Coates was holding that reel in her hand saying, "Are you sure? Like, we should put the scene back in." Like, it came that close to never being in the film.
Yeah.
And it's just, it really is. It's the key, and I think it's also what elevates that character from just being kind of a dumb criminal, because he's self-aware.
Yeah.
And there's something so poignant about that scene, the way that he staged them. He tries to get her to lay down in the bed with him, and she just doesn't even move. There's that great stillness to her and that she has that all throughout the film. I think. I mean, that's one of the things I love about her in the film, is that she just is the ability just to not move and to not react and just to wait.
Yeah,
is so great. But that, and it's and when that little speech he gives about the how dumb criminals are, and if you were and what it would mean for her to to sleep with a criminal just for the thrill of it. And it's almost sort of this David Mamet kind of rhythm to it. Why, what does he say? He says, why would you think that? Why would I think that about you?
Right.
And he's just he really, really wants her to know that he respects her and cares about her. And I can't imagine the film without it.
Yeah. Well, that scene and it is the bizarre. it's not even a contradiction. I don't know what you'd call it, but it's the idea that a studio, when presented with something like this, which is simultaneously new wave cinema and classic studio romance, like it is an old school movie star movie.
Oh, and everyone looks gorgeous. Yeah.
I mean, everyone is their best versions of themselves, except for Clooney, who's playing against that, which makes it more romantic.
Absolutely.
And they wanted that out, and also like Soderbergh's instincts weren't 100% on this either, because there's a story about how he wanted to shoot the trunk scene in a single take.
That's right.
And in the end, went a different way with it because it was just too either dark or monotonous, or it happened too early in the film, or he moved it and then cut some of it.
I think monotonous. He said that when he screened that for the preview audience, you could just feel the air being sucked out of the room, and then it was like a good 20 minutes before the audience was back on board again. Because everything about the movie is so jazzy. And I mean, New Wave is a great way of describing it. Like, it's very, there's jump cuts and these little zooms, and there's. I mean, again, I come back to the word playful again and again with this movie, but to all of a sudden go from that to just locking on them in the trunk. I've seen the scene; it's on the DVD, and it's good, but it doesn't have that same, doesn't have the energy of the rest of the film.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe the only other way to keep it would be to put it in later, but that wouldn't make sense either.
It wouldn't make sense either, because that's. I mean, I think it really comes about 12 minutes in.
Yeah,
really soon. They're really soon. They're locked in together, and without that, that's your inciting incident, as the gurus would say.
Yes, and we're recording this 3 or 4 days after Robert McKee just shat the bed on that.
Oh God!
With his reviews of Spotlight.
The
other one, Room, how it changes genres halfway through and therefore is terrible.
I'm sure that Robert McKee hated this movie.
I was wondering. I mean, I'd love to, and this is what I said to Lenny Abramson on Twitter as soon as he tweeted that out. It's like, well, the only McKee worth listening to is the one that Charlie Kaufman wrote in Adaptation.
Right.
Because the real one is apparently a jerk.
Yeah.
But it's fundamentalism, right? It's like, this is the only way of seeing something, and therefore anyone else is wrong. But this movie would hopefully make Robert McKee very angry, because it takes every risk that he warns people away from, and that's the only way you make art. If you follow a formula, you will get a formula film. And this one, I'm thinking of, what is it, a dozen Leonard adaptations over the last 20 years?
Yeah.
The only ones that really burst, like Get Shorty, which is just delightful, candy-colored version of Leonard.
Yeah.
And Jackie Brown, which is good, but I still think Tarantino messes it up a bit.
Do you think so?
Yeah, it could be. There's an amazing 97-minute movie in there.
Because I think it's funny, because I'm not a huge fan of Get Shorty. I loved the book, and I felt like the candy-colored quality turned me off, because it did feel a little cartoonish. And Jackie Brown, for me, has been a grower over the years.
Yeah, I have to admit, I haven't watched it probably haven't watched it in 10 years.
Oh, definitely watch it again.
Because now I think I'm Forster's age.
Right. Oh, God. Well, you might have the same reaction I did to Clooney's near the end of Out of Sight. But I remember reading an interview with Scott Frank when Out of Sight came out, and he was talking about Jackie Brown, what he thought of it. And he said, I think that Tarantino did an amazing cinematic version of what it feels like to read an Elmore Leonard novel.
Oh, that's interesting.
With all the digressions and all the, oddball scenes that those books possess. Whereas he said, but I really feel like if you're going to take a book and adapt it for the screen, it's got to have some kind of spine to it. And this, and he was obviously comparing what he'd done with,
right.
But I think he really does find that, like, he does. It's interesting because he jettisons a lot of stuff from the book. Have you read Out of Sight? Yeah. I mean, this has got a very in the book's got a very kind of a bleak ending. Yeah. Because like Buddy stays in the house, Buddy dies. There's no Ripley character, the Brooks character.
Yeah, it's just a robbery.
And it's dark. Not in a bad way. I mean, I love the book, but you read that and you think, God, how's this going to be a movie? And Frank somehow found a way to keep all the best elements of the book, the characters, the dialogue, that charm. Because I mean, it's probably the most romantic thing that Leonard's ever written.
I would say,
right?
I can't think of anything other. Like all the other weird romantic angles in Justified were invented for the show,
right? With
his approval, but still, like that's not in the text.
That's not really not his thing,
yeah.
And But making it satisfying, like, bringing the diamonds in. They actually are able to find the diamond at the end, or, inventing this great little tag with Sam Jackson's character, which is so great, and which is interesting. Do you know the origin of that scene?
Well, I know that they broke it late, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, they didn't know how they're going to leave the audience feeling satisfied without doing something kind of cheeseball. And Scott Frank was banging his head against the wall, and he was talking to Elmore Leonard, and who, of course, would talk to lots of law enforcement, lots of criminals to get, real life ideas for his books. And just in passing mentions this guy who had broken out of prison like 8 times.
That's right.
He's like, wait a sec. Look, he broke out of prison 8 times? And the wheel starts turning. And it's this amazing scene that, and Soderbergh so brilliantly casts Sam Jackson, which should, again, this should not work.
Yeah, it should break it apart.
It should break it apart. You cannot bring Sam Jackson in 1998 into the end of a movie without distracting the audience. And somehow, and his reasoning was, as soon as you bring Sam Jackson on for that scene, as an audience, you believe every word that comes out of his mouth.
Yeah, it's the authority.
Absolutely.
And when I saw it in 98, the audience loved him.
Yeah.
Instantly. You could just feel, he shows up and he looms out of the shadow, and people just went, "Oh."
Yeah.
And they were happy to see him.
Yeah.
And they knew that everything is going to work.
Everything's going to be okay.
If he's telling you these things, they're going to happen.
Yeah.
And that last moment, and again, it's like a wonderful little pop song in itself, that last self-contained sequence, because that is an amazing short film on its own.
Oh, it really is.
And because the A story is over, you get to feel you get to feel Karen's presence in that scene, even though she's not in it, which is kind of amazing. The sense that she is, she's smart enough to have engineered this, and therefore she's worthy of him. Which is the thing that all romantic comedies, or not all romantic, it's the thing that drives all romantic comedies. Because when you're introduced to someone and someone else, and the movie says these two people are subjects, you will, in the back of your mind, they're going to end up together because that's why you're here. That's
right.
The kind of movie you want to see. So for me, the joy of a romantic comedy is when you demonstrate that, when the characters earn that. And it almost never happens, because the whole point of romantic comedies is that people are put together because they are meant for each other. And so there's very little work. So there has to be a phony third act complication where you're like, oh, you said you slept with that guy, and they have to break it all apart. It's the end of When Harry Met Sally.
Right.
It kind of literalizes the idea that he finally figures out that he's worthy of her and that she deserves him, which is a weird narcissistic way to frame it, but perfectly in line with the character. Here, in Out of Sight, it doesn't even happen on camera. We know they're perfect for each other. They know they're perfect for each other. But both characters have perfectly good reasons for why they can't be together. And so the only way to do that is to devise a plan in which they will continue to do this forever. And it isn't ever mentioned on camera. It doesn't come up. Like, it just germinates over the course of the story.
And that's one of the brilliant things about that ending. It's completely in keeping with the style of storytelling we've seen all the way through.
Yeah.
And I think it was Billy Wilder who said, if you let the audience add up, A plus B, they will love you forever. And that's, I mean, you understand what that means when that Sam Jackson character is in the back of the van, that he's broken out, that, it's nothing is said and everything is said.
Yeah, it's
and
elliptical storytelling.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so gorgeous. And that, just that little shot of her where she almost, as the van pulls away, almost kind of like buzzes the camera but doesn't quite.
Yeah.
It's
like a half smile.
It's a half smile. Yeah.
And it's a secret between her and us.
Yeah.
Where, again, we're part of it. We're involved. We're invested in their relationship, but we also get to be rewarded for that investment, which, again, a lot of movies don't do. Happily Ever After, that's fine. It's a line from David Koepp that I quote a lot on the show. He likes to end on the promise of happiness. He's not interested in happiness as an ending, but if you can go out with the idea that everything is going to work out if these people work at it or they try a little harder, then your whole room is going to love you. I
think that's the only way you can really do it. Yeah, I really do. And it's interesting too, because if you take that scene out, you pretty much have a reasonably accurate adaptation of the book, because the book ends with the phone conversation between Karen and her dad. Yeah. Where he says, my little girl, a tough babe. I remember when Leonard died, like, that's what I I posted that on Facebook. I transcribed that last page. I think it's such a beautiful way to end the book. But, not necessarily the most satisfying ending for a film.
Yeah.
And the way that Frank is able to synthesize Leonard's language and kind of mimic it in a way that you don't really know, what's his and what's from the book, and it just there's such a naturalism to it. That's it's to me it's one of the greatest book adaptations, because I usually you read a book and then you see the movie and it's disappointing because it's so much less than what you imagined, and this really felt like it wasn't equal to the book for me.
Yeah. I actually have a pretty hard and fast rule about that. I won't read a book if there's a film coming.
Right.
Because it happened once or twice. Gone Girl landed in my lap before the adaptation was announced, I guess. And everybody was saying, oh, this is so great. So I did read that. But I find it poisons me for the movie, or at least it puts me on the back foot because I've got the movie in my head. I've already adapted it. I've seen it in my head as I read the book.
And that's a great example. I didn't really love Gone Girl the movie. Mm-hmm. Loved the book experience.
Had you read it first?
I had read the book first. Right. And read it in a white heat. Read most of it in a single night. And to me the movie was a letdown in comparison. But yeah, and I feel the same way. I'm always very, it's funny. It's trying to choose between, that incredible internal literary experience and all that creates for you versus something that's so immediate and visceral in a film. And usually, I'm the same way. I'll usually pick the latter. I'll pick the film. But this is the rare example where I feel both are equally good.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know which I'd recommend first. I guess because I'd read the book, but years earlier. Mm-hmm. I guess it would be okay to start with the book because the film does enrich it rather than work against it.
I'd happily recommend the movie first, actually.
If you go back and read the book after, you'll feel things are missing.
Have you read the other short story that Karen is in that kind of fills in her backstory?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Is that in When the Women Come Out to Dance?
When the Women Come Yeah. Which
has Karen Sisko and Raylan.
Yeah.
And the other Karen Sisko, Carla Gugino, who was just so good at that in the TV series, the short-lived TV series that no one understood was good.
Right.
I got to reprise the role a tiny bit in one episode of Justified. They had to change her name.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she shows up. She's in, I think, season 3.
What's her role? What is her?
She is playing Karen Sisko, and she has a different name.
She's a U.S. Marshal?
She's a U.S. Marshal. She's from someone else's office, and they introduce her, and she says something about how, it's my married name now.
And is her first name Karen?
I don't know that it is. I don't know that we ever hear it.
Yeah.
It might be Catherine. But it's one of those moments where you just sit there and go,
I did hear about this.
This should be another thing. And they were going to bring her back for the final episode, but they couldn't make the timing work because she was in Australia shooting San Andreas.
Oh, it's too bad.
But we got to talk about that a little bit when she came through on the press tour and just how frustrating it is to see other people doing that role. Not that role, but she mentioned something about how frustrating it is as an actor to see someone else nailing the tone and being embraced for it, whereas her show just kind of struggled. Mm-hmm. And so going back and playing it again was just see what we could have done, you idiots. Look what this show could have been.
But it's worth noting that when Out of Sight came out, it was not a hit.
No,
it did very poorly.
It was misunderstood even then.
Yeah,
because you have this. It's if you know Soderbergh's work, if you know Clooney's work, it's revelatory. Mm-hmm. It really is the game changer. It's the thing that lets him make Ocean's 11 and become financially successful. It's the thing that gives Universal the confidence to let him make Aaron Brockovich, mm-hmm. and then Traffic after that. That's the ball starts rolling with Out of Sight for Soderbergh because everybody who needed to love it loved it, even if a mass audience didn't.
Well, I think the National Board of Review gave it the Best Picture of the Year.
That sounds right.
Yeah. It got some really amazing accolades. I don't think it even got a single Oscar nomination. I think it got adapted. Did it get an adapted screenplay for Frank?
I want to say yes.
No, I don't think it did.
That's just wrong.
I don't think it did. But and this cover, which I'm so glad that the Blu-ray restores, the poster, the original poster, which I loved. I used to see this in the subway, and I was, oh god, I can't wait to see Out of Sight. And I think it probably turned most people off. It's very kind of 1960s.
Yeah.
It's a real throwback.
It's stylized in a way that now we just accept.
Right.
Because this movie made it okay to do that again, even though it took another 10 years for that sensibility to filter down. I think, the 70s revival really started 10 years ago now, where people started saying, oh, let's, make movies the way they used to be made. And it was because tastes had changed and the world had evolved a little bit, and also because Soderbergh was making them again.
Well, that's it. You look at those movies like The Limey, like Out of Sight, and
look Traffic owes a lot
yeah.
to like observational stuff from the 60s and 70s as well. And
for sure, but if you look at them just objectively from a visual standpoint, they feel like TV shows now. Mm-hmm. They feel like TV series now. Like that, they're shot that way. They're edited that way. I want to say it was like American Crime or something. Somebody was showing me some episodes of that, and it was edited in this very sort of elliptical, Soderberghian kind of way, where you're jump cutting and dialogue is kind of tracking over top of the cuts. And
really?
Yeah, I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Like I cannot imagine this happening on a mainstream network TV show. 10, 15 years ago, and now it's accepted now. And he made that palatable again.
Yeah. I think he doesn't get enough credit for just how influential he is as a filmmaker, because he's so singular that why would you even? Why would you try to imitate that? Why would you try to do that? But instead, it's not that he's being imitated, but it's the ideas he's putting out into the world are filtering through. Like, people embrace what he's doing because it's so joyful. And that's the other thing, too, about Out of Sight, where I didn't even mention the score. Oh, which is the other key, right?
Yes.
It's the thing that tells you everything's going to be okay, even when people are shooting each other in the face.
Yeah, it's always, it's always buoyant.
Yeah.
And
it's riffing on soul music.
It's got a Lalo Schifrin kind of quality to it as well. But there's also, because it is coming out in the late 90s, there's a bit of almost a trip-hop quality to it at times. So it's sort of everything old is new again. But yeah, that's a good point. Like I never thought about that before. But you do feel like this score is helping carry you along. And of course, then Holmes did a lot of music for Ocean's 11,
and those are the only movies and at the same time, like simultaneously, even with The Limey and a few other things, Soderbergh starts shifting away from orchestral scores.
Yeah,
to the point where like the Magic Mike films have a little ambient stuff in it, but otherwise it's all diegetic. Like there's no score music. Or Haywire or something like that, where it's minimalist and specific.
Right, Haywire. There's scenes. There's fight scenes that are completely silent except for the sound effects.
Yeah.
And that was something interesting about this. I'm sort of talking about that mix of what he's bringing in terms of an indie sensibility with a big studio demands. The opening scene of Out of Sight, which we already talked about, which has music. He originally wanted to start it with just the sounds of the street.
Right.
So you just in Miami, panning around, you find him, and it was actually his producer saying, "No, you have to have music here so people know what kind of movie it is."
Yeah. And it's absolutely the right decision.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah. Although Spielberg gets through, it isn't until Bridge of Spies last year that he can score an opening sequence without any music.
Oh yeah,
that's
right.
Seduced by the New York subway ride and all the noise of it.
That's great. That's a great sequence.
Yeah. It kind of is. Yeah. So the wrap-up question then is the same as well, which is that we've touched on this already. But what of the Soderbergh aesthetic, or what of Out of Sight, have you personally borrowed, looked to, saluted, cannibalized?
Cannibalized is a great word. Cannibalized is an excellent word. My second feature, Last Hitman, is a pretty shameless rip on Out of Sight and Leonard in general, and it was actually something that watching it again really I realized how much stuff that I'd ripped off that I'd forgotten I'd ripped off. I mean, the central relationship in that film between Joe Mantegna's hitman character and then Liz Whitmer's daughter, who's like his wheelman. So close to the Karen Marshall. It's embarrassing. Actually, I'm embarrassed to discuss this. I even had my composer do kind of like a little funky, David Holmes type piece of music for one scene, and like that's sort of like the nadir of being influenced by this film.
But is this one of those good artists borrow, great artists steal kind of situations?
Oh, probably not. Probably not. I think it's just. I think if anybody watches that film now, I'll be embarrassed. But beyond that, I mean, I think as I said, this is one of the first DVDs that I got. So those commentary tracks for this and for The Limey were kind of like a film school for me. And the way he would talk about the way he worked with actors, the way he would set up shots, or just his approach to filmmaking. I think those lessons are ones that I've carried through on everything that I've done. Like allowing, and yeah, we discussed this earlier, the idea of like everyone existing in the same film, finding a tone, like finding a really kind of like even tone is always so important to me. And the use of natural light, in a lot of Soderbergh's work, and the way he uses the camera, the way that he allows things to fall out of focus. He's sort of the anti-De Palma, right? Because De Palma's always like, well, everything can be in focus. We got to use the lenses.
People might miss something important.
Yeah, right. And I love the fact that so often, Soderbergh will frame a shot where something's out of focus that's really key. And I love that. I mean, there was a whole scene in The Girlfriend Experience where, they're talking in the foreground and they're out of focus. Color. I mean, I honestly feel like he's probably the filmmaker who has influenced me the most, because he made filmmaking seem very approachable. Right. He made it seem doable, and he made it seem like you didn't need to be James Cameron. You didn't need to be someone who was manipulating everybody or yelling at everybody. He presents this idea of everyone working together and collaborating, and that's how you bring the best out of people. So this was really, I mean, I'd seen other Soderbergh films before this, but this was the one where I really felt like there was an energy here I like, and he carries that through to today, and the humanity.
Yeah. I'm constantly surprised by people who say that they find his films cold.
I don't get that at all.
There's so much pleasure in the filmmaking itself. Like, he's inviting you to share how much fun he's having making these movies. Movies like this especially, but also even in stuff like Che, where there's formal playfulness.
Which I haven't seen. I'm embarrassed to say I haven't seen Che. It's one of the few I haven't seen.
I was sure when I saw it at Cannes. It was the one year I went to Cannes.
Wow.
I had the one experience of seeing all of Che in a single sitting.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where when you see it, you think they're immediately going to announce that this is a work in progress, and they're going to try to turn it into, some distributor will get their hands on this and turn it into a 3-hour movie.
Right, exactly.
And then the more distance you get from it, the better it gets. The warmer it is, and the more complex it is, and you have to let the film stew for months. But it's totally an investment worth making. Yeah.
Well, they're films for patient viewers.
Yeah.
And people who really love, I think, who kind of love bathing in films.
Yeah.
I think we probably both share that quality.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Oh, out of sight is a good steam.
It is a good steam, and not just that scene in the bathtub.
It's true. My thanks to Chris Warre. And seriously, check out This Is Not What You Had Planned at nsi-canada.com, either in the online short film fest or just by typing Smets into the search box. You can find Chris on Twitter at CWSmets, all one word, and you can find Out of Sight in an excellent Blu-ray and DVD special edition from Universal Studios Home Entertainment. It's also available for sale and rental on iTunes and Google Play. It's really good, but you knew that already. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, or on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, promise not to break into your house and rob your aquarium. Thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.